So, The Invisible Man is a remake of the 1933 movie of the same name. Although, this time around, the main character is a girl named Cecilia, played by Elizabeth Moss, who has an abusive boyfriend who decides to take his own life and leave her his fortune. She suspects his death was a hoax. As a series of coincidences turn lethal, Cecilia works to prove that she is being hunted by someone nobody can see. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Alex.
Alex, what were your thoughts on The Invisible Man?
It was a well-crafted horror movie that really, I have really nothing bad to say against it, but I have just personal problems with the way a couple of the plot segments were executed. But overall, it's a movie that, it gets you on the edge of your seat. Like, you don't know where the characters are safe. You don't know where the characters are in danger, except when there's actual confrontations. But, like, again, when certain scenes are being built up, you never know, like, if their life is at stake or if there's just a creepy invisible man watching them from, down the hall.
Yeah, I enjoyed the movie for the most part too. There were a bunch of, I guess, WTF moments, you could say, during the movie that I guess we'll go into at some point. But overall, I enjoyed it. And I actually did watch the 1933 one about a month ago, and this is completely different from that.
Yeah,
I was completely different movies.
Yeah, I was just to say, you're more prepared than I am, but I can definitely just from like one Google search, I was like, this makes no sense as to why the two are related. Because I know it's also, I know this is the 1933 version is based off of a horror. It's like from a horror novel from like the early 1900s or late 1800s. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, the 1933 movie. It's kind of like a Universal monster movie, but it's like not super connected to those, I guess you could say. The movie is a little more science fiction than horror.
You're talking about the 1933 one?
Mm-hmm. It's basically a scientist who, I forget what he's experimenting with, but he eventually finds out how to become invisible or whatever. And then one of the chemicals that's used, I forget what it was called, but it's a fictional drug. It makes him like really angry when he's invisible or whatever. And then he's like, this whole time, the movie, he's trying to like find out how to like become visible again. And so he's trying to do it without anyone noticing.
Lock him up! All right, you fools. You've brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it.
And everyone keeps like, oh my gosh, there's an invisible man, like flipping out. And
a textbook monster horror movie, which is entertaining in itself, but I think one of the behind-the-scenes videos I've seen on YouTube after watching it, they were very much like, we're not trying to create some spooky Frankenstein dude who uses chemistry to turn himself invisible. He wanted the more modern touch to horror, like, use technology as an element to horror, which is where, Adrian's this optics entrepreneur, as far as we can tell.
He's an optics engineer.
He's like a founder of some company, which that was an interesting part where that was, again, I can respect where that's not crucial or like the key part of the movie that you need to like go into detail on, like how he's so good at optics or optic technologies or whatever. But I think it was a little comedically just kind of touched over, where it's like there was like a couple articles where they just said, oh yeah, optics dude dead, he killed himself, and like that's all we know about this guy, and the fact that he's rich and he lives in this isolated mansion.
Yeah, and then you have his brother reading her the will, and he tells her more information about him, I guess, when they were younger and things like that. You get more of an indication of him, I guess, as a character.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to have to go and talk about the brother. I'll come out and say this, I think he was one of the most interesting characters in this movie. Besides Elizabeth Moss's performance, which I think was fantastic. The brother's lawyer, which the name's skipping my head right now. But
yeah, I can't remember his name.
I think in particular that role was amazing, because you just could not tell. Well, without getting into spoilers, you could not really tell, I guess, just his role in the plot, in the conflict. He's obviously there, he's talking with Cecilia, he has interactions with the sister, he obviously has interactions with Adrian because they're siblings, but like, you never know how.
Yeah, okay, I just looked it up. His name's Tom.
Tom. All right, yeah. Tom was really interesting again because when it came to the suspense, you could not predict like what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, you know, with Adrian's scenes and his suspense, it got to the point where it was pretty obvious what he was going to do. He was going to do some very traumatizing things to Cecilia to make her feel bad about leaving him and trying to get her to come back in his very twisted way.
Yeah, it's also not like a full-on horror movie. I would say it's like a thriller movie with elements of horror. That's what I would say if I had to describe the movie. And it also has like a couple action scenes, I guess, too.
Uh-huh. I like to think of it as, in comparison, obviously, the 1933 Invisible Man and the 2020 Invisible Man were filmed in both very different points in time in cinema history, and horror has evolved to not just be spooky man takes chemicals and becomes monster. It can be it can still be that. You can still have your very typical monster horror movies, like, let's say what's a good monster movie comparison today? Like, not necessarily like a monster comparison, but like a modern horror, like just antagonist trying to do like a slash and gash of his victims.
Well, in Monster, probably the most popular one. Well, he was popular before, but Pennywise.
Oh yeah,
would probably be the most popular one.
Yeah, so I mean, again, horror today can be your Pennywise the Clowns, or it can be your very psychedelic Ari Aster movies where you don't know what to believe. Or it could be your Invisible Mans, where you have invisible men, I guess might be the might be the plural, but you can have all of these different types of elements still making the final concoction of a horror movie. And I think that's what's really cool, is to see this original idea transformed from the 1933 to the 2020, where they take two of these completely different concoctions to tell a similar story with a similar concept.
Yeah, they're also very completely different plots.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, another thing I like to mention is some of the side characters I was just like, I guess I wasn't the biggest fan of, and I also wasn't sure as to, at first, what their relationship was to Elizabeth Moss's character. Like, she first escapes with her sister from her boyfriend, which is a great opening scene, by the way. And she's, like, living at a friend of hers, the detective's house. He's a police detective or officer or something like that, and he has a daughter. At first, I thought that him and her sister I thought he was her sister's boyfriend. Yeah, I thought that they were a couple.
Yes. But they weren't.
They weren't, yeah. I was like,
they were mutual friends, and the sister was like, you can stay at my friend's house. He's a detective. He has a daughter. Yeah. Like, this. I just didn't pick up on that right away. Yeah,
I
think I personally would say that was just poor exposition, because I do remember that kind of just being spotty. Where it was one of those things where, where the beginning of the movie wasn't very dialogue heavy. It was very much, they're just showing Cecilia escaping Adrian's mansion, and then she gets into her sister's car, and then she goes to the detective's house. It's very, again, not very dialogue heavy. They're just supposed to show you what's happening instead of telling you what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, show don't tell.
Yes,
that famous saying.
That's the famous, layman's way, succinct way to put it. But yeah, that was pretty much what happened. And by the time the show don't tell introduction was completed, there was never oh, by the way, these two people are dating or they aren't dating. Or if it really was, my memory's not razor sharp, but it was a sentence that was disguised by some overlying element.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should also note that we haven't just watched this movie. Alex, you saw this at a drive-in theater, if I'm correct, from what you said. Yeah. And I saw this about a month or two ago. I borrowed it from the local library on Blu-ray. Did you have anything to continue, Alex?
What I'm curious to hear what you have to say regarding a non-spoiler opinion would be, what do you think about the particular tactics of suspense with Adrian's character? I think it was a rising action that I've almost never seen before, and I think it was perfect. Well, I think it was really well done, and I think it's almost honestly never been done from what I've seen. And I kind of wanted to get your input on what you thought about the way the suspense and like the scenes with Adrian and the house and all of that.
Oh, okay. You mean the house, the restaurant, the...
Yes, I had to do my circle to get around to what I really wanted to ask you. But yes, Brandon, what do you think about the suspense with Adrian and his very important scenes?
I thought they were good for the most part. There were a couple where I was like, there's like some movie logic moments. The one part where she goes to his house, I thought, from what I remember, it seemed like his like door to his house was like unlocked. She just walks in. This is at the middle of the movie. And also his dog just happened to be there too.
Yeah.
At least the setup to how she like got into the house was like a little weird, and then the fact that the dog was just happened to be there. Because I swore at the beginning of the movie that she let the dog loose, and I guess that was implying that he was abusive to his dog too.
Yeah, I actually think the dog did not get out of the house. I think what happened was, well, I remember the beginning. I think the thing that actually got Adrian awake was the dog sounding the car alarm.
Like either she or the dog like tapped the car and the alarm sounded.
Yeah, I think they didn't show him in the garage, but they showed the garage door being closed and the dog was not in the shot. They saw the car.
Okay.
Or they saw Cecilia leaving the garage and the door was closing and you could not see the dog in the shot.
Yeah, because pretty much right when the car alarm sounds, it immediately shows her running through the woods and then eventually to the road.
Yeah, and that's where she met the sister.
Mm-hmm. It was obviously she had planned this, and without a single line of dialogue, they did a really good job of showing it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, another little tidbit. The movie was actually directed by Lee Wanell, which people might recognize. He has an acting career too. He was in the first Saw movie. He played Adam, and he's also in The Bye-Bye Man, which I have not seen. He apparently plays Larry.
Interesting. Yeah, I know this is isn't this like his second movie that he's directed and he's also starred in?
Yes. He didn't star in this. I don't think I saw him.
Not this one, but
the other one I did not see. The other one he's directed was the movie Upgrade, and that was basically a sci-fi action movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think that covers what I have to say about the movie without going into spoilers.
Same here.
All right, we're going into spoilers. You've been warned. Alright, Alex, so how did you feel that they revealed that Tom was the Invisible Man the whole time?
It's what got me confused, and then I couldn't just rewatch it like online for free, so I had to just listen to some people analyzing it to me on YouTube or finding me on YouTube. It was very confusing for me. And I think it honestly...
Yeah, and then there were parts, because he's wearing an optic camera suit. I kept wondering if both him and Adrian had a suit on and were doing different things at different times.
Yeah, like it's like they're in on some they're in on some conspiracy together against her. As if Tom himself is actually the insane one that wants to get Adrian and Cecilia together and have them have a baby, or if it's just Adrian who's
I completely forgot about the baby part.
Yeah, because she's basically the thing that was keeping her, at least I think, at ease in the beginning of the movie was that she was quote unquote taking birth control, because the way that Adrian was going to keep her in his life indefinitely was with a child, and Cecilia was secretly taking it. And then there was the scene where she was in the insane asylum and Tom was like, oh yeah, by the way, you're pregnant. And you were placeboed once Adrian found out. I think that was really cool. My only real complaint with Tom was the exposition as to why he's also in on it. Because again, we're sitting here speculating.
And then he also tells Cecilia a couple times that Adrian was a bad brother to him when they were kids and stuff. So it's like you're thinking like, why would he want to be an accomplice to his brother? I guess.
Yeah, to me that was explained in the idea that they both have some antisocial personality disorder. Basically, they're sociopaths, and they could just blatantly lie and create a falsity like that and just say, yeah, or have Tom say, yeah, Adrian was abusive to me too, so like I know where you're coming from, but I'm doing my brother a favor because he's dead. Which was obviously part of this coup, which is very obviously socio and psychopathic. But I think again the biggest thing for me was, like, okay, it was one of those movies where it was like big twist. It was Tom this whole time.
Yeah, they're like, oh,
and then it rolled credits. That was actually, I think, now that we're talking about
that actually happened. Like he tracked her to Cecilia's house, and then like they revealed it was Tom. Yeah. She shot him up. Then she went to Adrian's house and then had the whole thing.
You're right. It wasn't just they showed you and then rolled the credits, but when it came to that storyline, like that line of information, that's where it stopped once the credits rolled. Like that was it. It was just you found out it was Tom, and like that was it. Like they showed the ending where they killed Adrian, where Adrian got killed, and then Cecilia comes out, calls 911, seemingly like actually frantic, which is I think what was interesting, and then her just hanging up, not really giving a crap at the end of the day.
Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of the ending. I guess just because of the fact that she killed Adrian, because then you're kind of saying that she is no better than he is, I guess, in a way.
No, I mean, in that light, that itself is not my problem with the ending. I think, again, if she's no better than him, it's kind of one of those things where, like, we're all human, and when we're, super isolated, we're the kind of people who are, like, insane, and, well, you're not insane because you're rich and you're isolated, but I think it ties to the themes about, like abusive relationships and how it's not always a one-sided sword. It's or a one-sided blade. It's always double-sided because not one party is completely innocent. Not one party has the moral high ground. Which again is not referring to the initiating or the initial situation. It was very much Cecilia was the only one receiving abuse and Adrian was the abuser. But of course, in the end, when the conflict came out and Cecilia's choice was to kill Adrian for what he did, it just kind of shows that the rage of bubbles in us that can sometimes happen when we're either in an abusive intimate relationship or an abusive relationship with a parent, like the rage that can build up can sometimes be fatal.
Yeah, I guess when you put it that way, it sounds better, I guess. And then also, like I was mentioning about movie logic, there's stuff that happens for the sake of movie logic. So, like, at the restaurant, Adrian kills Cecilia's sister, but restaurants always have security cameras around, so if they play back that security footage, they would have probably seen the floating knife.
Yeah, so security footage would have to be presented in whatever trial.
But then I know later on in the movie when Cecilia escapes the police station, her friend that's the police detective, I can't remember his name. I think he mentions to her that either the footage had been erased or something like that.
James is the detective name, Detective Lanier.
Okay, yeah, James. It seemed that he was implying, or I don't know if they fully mentioned it, but it seemed like the footage had been erased or altered or something like that.
Yeah, I can kind of understand that, where it's an interesting discussion to have about the movie logic with this, like, does the justice system look at this completely like legitimate footage that would arguably prove her innocence, and like, does that hard evidence that proves her innocence stay intact, and how exactly does the justice system handle the case, specifically how do they handle Cecilia? And I think the way you make the argument is it's very much just one of those things they kind of gloss over, because it's like, well, for the sake of where we want to go with this movie, we need to put her in a sane asylum, which assumes that the police just say, yeah, she did it. Or another way to think of it is that in reality, the way criminal cases get filed is it's not within 24 hours of being arrested, you get a trial and like the official verdict on what you did was made and you begin to serve your sentence. It's you go into custody, and depending on how big or small, or your case would report under, or whatever the term is, would affect, like, if it's like 30 days or like 3 days or 3 hours. And I think in the case of Cecilia, they saw that they needed to take more action than just confine her within the police department. And based off of her previous behavior and what she's being accused of, they put her in the insane asylum.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that it's interesting to me. I don't really have a for or against opinion on it. Again, it's open-ended movie logic, where you can just say, like, well, yeah, they kind of just glossed over it because they need to build suspense and have her in an asylum. Or, you know, like, if you take a realistic approach, which isn't always really right for movies, because, again, you're not dealing with the hardcore fiction. I would bet pretty good money that right now there's no optics technology, whatever the heck that means, to lead us to creating a basically invisible Iron Man suit.
Yeah, I know there's, at least the military has, like, invisibility technology. I don't think it's fully to the level that we see in the movie.
Yes.
And then, like you had mentioned, with her being in jail or whatever, there was also the whole part, I think, where she's actually talking to one of the cops, and Tom, I believe, but she's like, he's here right now, but I can't tell you about it.
Or, like, yeah, he's, like, speaking to me, or he's not speaking to me. Yeah, I know what exactly.
And then it would obviously, like, from an outsider standpoint, it obviously look like she's, like, going insane or something like that.
Yeah, again, I think that was honestly one of the best parts. What that brings back to kind of what I was talking about earlier when I asked you about suspense. What I realized was really cool by the time she got into the insane asylum was the escalation of what Adrian / Tom, basically the Invisible Man, was doing. Because in the beginning it was, oh, he turned the stove really high and burned bacon one time. Oh my gosh, that's so scary. And then there was the one time where he was watching from the hallway where they were, like, celebrating that the daughter could go to fashion school or something. And then it was just, again, a lot more minute things. There was a couple weirder things, but, like, nothing, like, physically threatening, where, like, he was taking pictures of Cecilia sleeping. And then it got more and more intense / weird. And then by the time the insane asylum events were unfolding, he was basically he was beating the crap out of people and shooting some of them behind.
Oh yeah,
like that's what I thought was
the action scene part. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's what was really cool, because it was very much like the action was rising with the severity of what the Invisible Man was doing. It was very parallel to that, and I thought that was really cool because it was, again, he was doing so many of these very minute things that are just like nuisances at the very worst. Again, like burning bacon, oh my gosh. Or there's the scene where it's like really cold outside, then there's a close-up of Cecilia, and then to the right, and then it zooms out a little bit, and then it shows the Invisible Man's breath just out of nowhere.
They don't make it blatantly. They don't make it blatantly, obviously. They don't, like, zoom in on him, but it's like you start seeing breath out of nowhere. I was like, what?
Yes, and and then again, it's so great because it's so parallel to the progress of the movie. And then, as I kind of hinted with my words before, the ending is kind of where I felt a little just confused, and I guess it kind of left like, that. What? It left that perfect, I guess, 70 minutes of the movie that was just really good and built up to something really meaningful. And then it was just kind of, all right, here's a plot twist. They're going to kill this person. She doesn't regret it because she thinks it's revenge. And then the detective is okay with it.
Yeah, I think just kind of bats an eye.
I think that was a really cool touch. I would believe that James looked at Cecilia and was like, you know what? This man has put you through some stuff that you really can't come back from. I guess he just killed himself. I think it's just one of those, humanizing sentiments at the end where it's just, yep,
Oh yeah, and that's another thing about the plot twist reveal or whatever. I was just like, okay, so he didn't commit suicide. So then I think they kind of showed around Adrian's house, and it looked like he just hid in a closet or something. Like they made it look like he was chained to a closet. Oh no, they made it appear that he had committed suicide, and then I don't know, like just didn't like go upstairs or whatever, something like that. It was something like that.
Yeah, it was an ending that I just felt was really rushed, or very well. I don't think rushed is the proper word. I think subtle is more appropriate, because it was very much, it was one of those. They opened and then they ended with one of those, show don't tell kind of methods. Of telling, like, what was happening. The only real dialogue that happened was the 911 call in the end, and the exchange between James and Cecilia. Everything else was just kind of unfolding as we saw it. Cecilia try to figure out how to get into the Invisible Man suit. We saw her put it in that one bag, can't really remember if she like hid it in the mansion or if she took it with her. But again, it was a show don't tell kind of ending, and I think that's okay. That's like perfectly fine. But if you are trying to introduce stuff that you need to talk about, you need to have more substance to, it's not a good idea. And I think again with Tom, that's the biggest problem, because like we only know Tom as like, we know him as a lawyer for his brother, and then we kind of suspect that he's in on whatever the heck Adrian's trying to do.
Yeah, you get a little like innuendos, I guess you could say, like
you get
like stuff from his body language, and
you get strong evidence to infer that he's in on whatever act is going against Cecilia, and then it instantly jumps to, at least in Tom's arc, it just instantly jumps to, oh yeah, he was killing people too. He was the Invisible Man too, and that was just something that was just kind of off-putting to me, because I was maybe it's just me being an amateur viewer of horror and an amateur of the genre, but like it was something that I just did not understand, how you were drawing the points from A to B and C to D and E to F and so on and so on.
Yeah. Trying to think of what else there is to talk about with this movie.
I can't think of any. I want to talk about movie logic a lot, because I think that is such a great topic for movies like this, and if we're reviewing them, that's of course how it should mostly constitute. I'm sure there could be a whole podcast episode or a whole like special on the movie logic behind stuff like this, because again, it's very open-ended, and it's something that is intended for further enjoyment, because the viewer is realizing what is going on their own, which I don't really have an opinion for or against that. I think
it's just little things that people notice while they're watching movies, and they're like, oh, if this happened, then this wouldn't happen as a result.
Exactly. And like I think you could be very subtle in some cases and just kind of hint to other like minor related aspects. Like, for example, if you're in one of the many cinematic or TV universes and you're making subtle nods to other series or other like characters in your shows, that's one thing, because everyone knows everything about that. But this is a one-time movie that is about 2 hours that has no other like connecting context, so you're being very subtle about things that are pertinent to just this one movie alone. And I think in that essence it is a problem, because there's just no way to really get it unless it's the director coming out saying this is how you were supposed to interpret the movie, which how often does that happen? Like none at all.
Yeah, and then like a good example of movie logic that a lot of people bring up. Have you seen all the Lord of the Rings movies, Alex?
Unfortunately, I'm not, and the internet shame me for it. I deserve it. I have seen The Fellowship of the Ring because it was free on Google Play.
Yeah, I don't feel like spoiling, even though it's predictable what the outcome of Frodo's quest to Mount Doom will be. I don't want to spoil it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's like something that happens in the third movie where they're like, oh, if they had just done this, then they could have easily destroyed the ring earlier.
I think that's something that can be applied to so much. Like, I mean, the classic example I'm thinking of is if Star-Lord didn't lose his cool with Thanos, then there would have been no more. Then there would have been no highest. The need for the highest grossed movie in history would have been non-existent. I think that's definitely one of those examples, and I think it's more. That's actually a really good way to put it from your eyes, because that is very textbook of movie makers saying we are doing X, so we need to just ignore Y.
It also happens in the books for those movies, obviously, but yeah.
I
get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's the one that people bring up a lot.
With the Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then you mentioned another one that people bring up with Star-Lord.
Yeah, if he had just kept his cool, or if Stark was more authoritative with his actions and his role, Although I think he was part of subduing Thanos, so that was probably not in store for him to do.
Another way you can also look at it too is if the Avengers weren't split in half after Civil War, if they were all united, then they probably would have. And Endgame wouldn't have happened as a result either.
Really?
If you think about it, like they're all this person's here, this person's there in Infinity War. Like they're not all together because like some people are like more with Iron Man, some people are more with Cap because you still have the fallout of Civil War. It's harder to get everyone to assemble again in Infinity War.
I would have never thought of it that way, but we can always talk about Avengers another time. I think.
Mm-hmm.
What is interesting is unfortunately I can't name or I can't confidently talk about every example I have with this movie alone, but in this movie alone there's many of those examples where, again, as you said, like if they had just looked at the footage, then like there's no need for her to be in the insane asylum. But the idea for the movie makers was to have a lot of really intense stuff happen in the insane asylum. So we're just gonna gloss over that one logical fallacy. I think there's that. There's the why the brother has to be part of the Invisible Man gig itself too. Why where is he coming from?
They could have just let his character be like how he was before the plot twist, honestly.
I think.
Yeah, and then done something different, or not have a plot twist at all.
Yeah, I think I think personally, my huge thing is again, we were talking about how the ending was very show not tell, and I think from the point of view of the director, they're like, well, yeah, we're gonna open and close our movie with minimal dialogue, but obviously, most of the movie, the sandwich, the contents in between the sandwich of the movie, we're gonna have dialogue, and I think that was their idea. And I don't think I was a fan of that. I think, or at least how they executed it, because again, they introduced.
I was fine for it for the beginning, but the ending just no.
Yes, because again, like they did not need to introduce a lot of stuff that didn't have good context. Again, with the Twisted Tom, I would say that it's not something that had a good context to just kind of show scenes of him being the bad guy and leaving it there. Like, we kind of leave this suspicion that he is insane, or as insane, if not more than Adrian, but we're never really given even just one little snippet as to him being actually this crazy. So it's just kind of one of those things where it's, we want to twist up the end in a way that you don't really see it coming, but you just don't kind of really, they kind of ignore the fact that the only thing we really know Tom as is this lawyer guy, and that's about it. Does that make sense? Yeah. What do you think it implies? Like, what do you think it implies that Tom was basically working with Adrian and, basically working as the Invisible Man with him too? What do you think that implies about Tom?
Since he does mention that he was abused from his brother as a kid, maybe like Cecilia mentions that he's very manipulative. So maybe over time, like he slowly kept manipulating Tom to be more like Adrian. And then when they get to the point where Cecilia is dating Adrian, then they just do this whole plan with the Invisible Man.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of one of those things where, the statement that I think I said earlier was just a sociopathic lie is actually true in the fact that Adrian, as this man who's obviously smart enough to make invisible mecha suits, is able, he's able to sway this brother into doing almost whatever he wants. And maybe that's something where he's just a master in hypnosis or for overall persuasion in general. I think that's a really good way to look at it. I think if I had anything to add or change about that theory, I would say I think Tom and Adrian are almost like codependent, if you know what I mean. They're both people who are just insanely messed up.
Guess they could say they feed off of one another.
Yes, I mean, because Tom and Adrian, I would not say are this unit. Like, Adrian's obviously this really successful guy with a girlfriend that he's treating like crap. And
they're not like Bonnie and Clyde, or I don't know, or even Batman and Robin. They're like, it doesn't seem like they're that close.
Yeah, but like, I think for me, it's one of those things where it's a value that's similar to, like, maintaining one's way of life. And in the case of Adrian and Tom, it is this, manipulating life where you're sociopathically just influencing other people. And in this case, for Tom and Adrian, it is Cecilia that they're antagonizing. They're just in on it together. And they're not, formally making these plans, making these alliances. They're not going with the flow, but they're very much their own people. Mm-hmm. Adrian is like, Adrian's goals are different than Tom's goals, where Adrian is in love with Cecilia in a very toxic way. He wants to beat her, and he also wants to get her pregnant. And Tom is kind of this guy who I think is even more antisocial, where he is watching all of this and is just getting almost being entertained by it. And I think, again, like those two difference in values together can very well conflict, and that's probably where, again, leading to Adrian's death was okay for Tom, because at the end, Tom and Adrian were not on the same boat at all. So when Adrian died, it was just kind of, all right, like, that's it. At least in Tom's eyes, that's it. He wasn't gonna get revenge and kill Cecilia, who obviously was not on his side either.
Yeah, another thing that I wasn't sure of is Tom's a lawyer, but does he also work for the same company that Adrian founded, I guess?
I'm sure if you're a lawyer for this guy as a billionaire tech guy, tech entrepreneur, I'm sure you're under the payroll of this company. Mm-hmm. I'm sure. Again, that's my movie logic assumption, because they don't talk about that.
Yeah.
But of course, that's such a minor one in comparison to what we just previously discussed. That's so minor. Like, oh my God, he's a lawyer being paid by who? Like, honestly, who cares?
Yeah, most people would be like, whatever.
Yeah, like, whatever. Like, okay, he gets paid by his brother, or he gets paid by this firm that his brother pays for, whatever. Anyways, he probably works under his brother. It's, again, one of those companies that they have their own lawyers for, and maybe Tom is one of them in the case that leads him to representing the quote-unquote suicide of Adrian.
Yeah. I think there was something else about Tom that I wasn't quite sure on, but it's completely slipped my mind, so... Okay, so do we want to give ratings now? Or first of all, would you recommend the movie, Alex?
Yeah, I'd recommend it. I think if you're looking to ease your way into horror movies, if you're looking to ease your way into intense slashers or intensely gory movies, this is a good one, because it's very light with its graphic content, and it's very much a good feeler for what suspense you will see watching horror movies. And I think also in general, it's very entertaining. So yes, I would recommend it.
Yes, I would also recommend it if you're looking for not just a straight up remake of a movie, or you want one that has a completely different take. I definitely recommend this. If you like smaller thriller movies, I would also recommend this. And for the rating, I think I'd give it a 7 out of 10. That's okay. What I'm going to give it.
I'm at an 8. I remember early on, I was like, yeah, that's a 6 out of 10. That ending stunk. At the end, I have to look at the entertainment value at hand, and I think the entertainment was absolutely phenomenal. It was this movie that kept you not knowing what the heck was going on until the very end. Like, obviously, it was a perfectly suspenseful movie. It had the best way of building up suspense, with the Invisible Man's actions being so subtle and cute, almost cute to a point where it was, straight up murdering people in the end. And I think I don't have any complaints from the actors. It wasn't crappy or confusing cinematography. So yeah, I would give it an 8 out of 10, because again, my biggest thing is the ending and movie logical fallacies.
Yes, that's the biggest reason why I guess I gave it a 7. It's just a lot of movie logic issues. Wasn't the biggest fan of the ending. A lot of stuff with Tom, I guess, not being explained enough, I guess. Also, the plot twist wasn't very satisfying.
Yeah, that's, I think, a key way to criticize this movie. Like, a plot twist is supposed to be the way Shyamalan does it. It's supposed to be so suspenseful that it whirlwinds your mind. Or, like, I'm thinking of Jordan Peele's Us. With the ending of Us, that was just completely, like, you're blown away. Whereas for Invisible Man, it was very much just, all right, oh, Tom put the suit on too. All right, cool. That was about it. But yeah.
Yeah, and then speaking of Shyamalan, M. Night Shyamalan gets a lot of inspiration from Alfred Hitchcock, which he's known for doing plot twists in his movie. And his are always, for the most part, are pretty shocking.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So, without further ado, I think we have covered everything there is to cover with
Can I say that's a wrap, or is that your job?
Well, we can do it either way, Alex.
Ooh, let's do it. Let's do it harmoniously, but at the same time.
You want to do it together?
All right.
All right. Countdown. 3, 2, 1.
That's a wrap.